From Krima Media in Johannesburg, I'm Bemani Baloyi. Today we're joined in studio by Zimbabwe Consulate Commercial official Mrs. Angelica Katuruza to discuss the country's plans to have minerals processed in the country and the contentious indigenization policy. Mrs. Katuruza, welcome. So I understand that Zimbabwe plans to have minerals processed in the country. Take me through some of the plans that you have in place to ensure that this happens.
Thank you, Madam. Zimbabwe would like to see all minerals mined in the country, processed in the country. To this effect, we've put in place an act to make sure that no one exports unprocessed minerals. We've also put in place a 15% kind of duty on any exports of minerals. This should enable us to process the minerals at home and make sure that we only export the finished product, which fetches more on the international markets.
But Mrs. Katuruza, infrastructure remains a challenge in Zimbabwe, and you would need facilities in terms of refineries, processing plants to be able to fully implement this policy. Take me through some of the plans you have in terms of establishing or building these refineries, and what you think what effect it will have on the economy in terms of job creation and the development of your economy.
Early last year, we began to introduce a plan. We put in place a plan called Zim Asset. This is a blueprint which indicates all the areas that must be looked at, that must be invested in, right from the manufacturing sector to the infrastructure development area. That blueprint shows and directs and guides the business community on all areas that they can invest in. So armed with that blueprint, we've seen investment into certain areas coming in, like road construction. We are now doing triple Ps, as well as energy, as well as buildings of factories and housing. So from that perspective, with the Zim Asset, as well as our policy on PPPs, we see ourselves going a long way in developing and also making sure that minerals are processed at home.
I understand that part of the reason for this is that you want to be able to empower Zimbabweans and create employment opportunities. Please comment on your intention to do that with this.
All right, that is very true indeed. From 1980, when Zimbabwe gained independence, the government of Zimbabwe sought to make sure that the Zimbabweans, the indigenous Zimbabweans, when we say indigenous, we mean black, the black Zimbabwean is also benefiting from the economic activity of the country. So that policy in the 1980s started by making sure that Zimbabweans are educated. So we expanded schools, we expanded technical institutions, and we made sure that even that gogo in the village was also educated enough to understand what is happening and to be able to sign a bank account. So as a result of that kind of education, we moved over now to the fact of introducing indigenization. The policy of indigenization seeks to ensure that those that were previously disadvantaged are now given a chance to join the mainstream economy, not just as workers, but as owners of capital, as people who process capital to obtain a profit. Yes.
Speaking about indigenization, Mrs. Katuruza, as somebody who works specifically here in South Africa to attract foreign investment into the country, isn't it a hindering effect for investors who think that the government is just trying to take control from them who are pumping the money into the system? What do you do in a case where you find people who feel this policy is hindering progress and investment in the country?
That policy hindering progress, I don't believe, madam. That policy does not hinder investment at all. Because what that policy simply is doing is to make sure that the means of production are owned both by the locals as well as the foreigners. And within that policy, as government, we are not saying the local Zimbabwean should get shares for free. No, they pay for their shares, especially in manufacturing, etc. In the only area that they don't pay for their shares is the mining sector, where the Zimbabwean owns the mineral underground. That one is owned by the Zimbabweans. And the foreign partner comes in with the working capital, with the capital itself. So as a diplomat working in South Africa and promoting investments in Zimbabwe, I am inundated by so many people who want to go to Zimbabwe to invest and to comply with the indigenization policy. Yesterday, I had a huge delegation. I will not mention the names, but they want to invest 10 million into Zimbabwe. They wanted to see how they can comply with the indigenization policy. And we have so many investors who do not care whether there is indigenization or not. All they just want is to invest, especially since with local partners, with the share communities, as well as with the employees owning part of that company, there is more stability in that company, unlike if it is owned by foreigners.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Katiruza. That was Zimbabwe Consulate Commercial Official, Mrs. Angelica Katiruza.